Hello and welcome to tonight's Fabian Women's Network event. My name is Councillor Kelly Green and I'm going to be chairing tonight. So I'm delighted to be talking about one of my favourite people, one of my absolute inspiration, Dr. Mowlam. I've got her book here and I'm delighted to be joined by a stellar panel of people to talk about Mo and her life and her legacy. If you want to tweet along to tonight's event, please use hashtag FWNMo. We'll be talking for an hour. If anyone has any questions or comments, please do put them in the Q&A. Oh, I think you come a bit early. So I'm going to start by introducing everyone to our panel before we ask them to talk. First, we'll be going to Henrietta Norton. Henrietta is a director and producer, and she's also Mo's stepdaughter. And in Mo's book, Momentum, she refers to her throughout as H, if anyone else has read it recently like myself. Then we'll be going to Anna Turley, who will be talking about Mo's life as an MP in Redcar, which was previously Anna's seat and hopefully one day will be again soon. Then we'll be going to Lord Alf Dubb, who Mo was actually his boss in Northern Ireland. Then we'll be going to MP Louise Hay, who's going to talk about Mo's legacy in Northern Ireland. And then finally, we'll be going to Naz Shah, who'll be talking about Mo's legacy as a woman in Westminster. So I can't tell you how excited I am to spend a whole hour now talking about Mo Mowlam. We'll just explain some of the background to this event. This is an event we've put together because we felt there wasn't enough time dedicated to looking at some of the amazing women in Labour Party history, and that in some ways women are removed from the narrative quite often, that we had to make a stand against that. So we started with Barbara Castle and then we're moving on to Mo Mowlam, and then we're going to carry on doing these events approximately one every 3 months. So hopefully people will join us for those too. So we're going to go over now without any further ado to Henrietta. Henrietta, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for having me here on this panel. I'm very excited about hearing from everyone else, but I'm going to try and kick off. So I am, as Kelly said, I am Mo's stepdaughter. I met Mo when I was 8, so that was in 1991. So I'll let you do the maths. We'd gone for a weekend actually to spend the weekend. My dad, my brother, and I had gone for a weekend to Redcar, which was Mo's constituency. And I didn't know anything about Mo. She was a backbencher MP. She was a friend of my dad's, as far as I understood. And we went up to spend the weekend with her. And the first time I met Mo, we arrived really, really late on the Friday night. So I didn't meet her then, and I was put into bed and I kind of, heard the howling wind going around the house and could hear the sea across the road. And in the morning I woke up and I came out of this bedroom onto this landing, and Mo kind of this woman appeared in front of me and kind of took my brother and I downstairs into the kitchen. And, we were 8 and 4, we were kind of expecting breakfast. And we kind of looked at her, and she kind of looked around the room and she looked as if she was about to do something breakfasty. And then she sat down at the table, put her feet up and lit a cigarette. And we kind of both just looked at her, and I thought, I've never met anyone like this. This is totally weird. And it transpired she had absolutely no idea how to even boil an egg. But she was completely amazing. And from that minute on, really, she was in our lives and became very quickly apparent to be our stepmom, was amazing with us in the sense that she used to say to my dad, they're your arms and legs, they come with you. And we always felt very much part of her world. And so while stepmom often can have sort of negative connotations from fairy tales, Mo was an amazing stepmom, and actually I kind of view her as my second mum. So with all that in mind, she was really good fun. I was young. She took us to the beach. We used to go and play with we didn't have real things like bucket and spades. We'd go with the pots and pans and the forks, none of which had ever been used for cooking. So they were really good for beach sandcastle making. Or we'd go along to Saltburn and we'd take clay out of the cliffs and we'd bring it back. And so there was always a kind of sense of fun with Mo. And that was the first thing I kind of got about her. But also, she had this energy. She was kind of leading things. She was kind of, life was there for going and getting on with and grabbing. And it was very inspiring as a little girl to watch. And I can't really talk about Mo. I mean, I can't talk about Mo. Other people are going to talk about Mo politically this evening. And as I say, you know, she was my family, and I'll kind of come back to that. But what I can talk about is some of the values that I feel Mo instilled in me. And the kind of thing that struck me earliest on was what I realized was, in amongst all the fun, we were also doing Mo's job. And I never really quite realized that that's what we were doing. You know, there'd be people around at the house, there'd be people would come around with their kids, the kids would be in the garden with me, she'd be in the kitchen with them, talking about whatever she was talking about with the constituents. There was a sort of, we were all lumped in it together. But one of the things that I kind of learned really early on was Mo was constantly striving for things to be fair. If things weren't fair, that was a problem. And the other thing was, no one is better than you, but also you're not better than anyone else. And I have to say that kind of is the greatest thing ever to be taught. And I live it and breathe it in my life. It's also an absolute curse because I'm terrible with hierarchy, but it is absolutely, I stand by it. And she taught me that. She also always made you feel that everyone deserves to be listened to and to be heard. And whether you know, I remember going to the House of Commons with Mo once when I was really young, and I watched her talk to a Tory MP. And I said to her afterwards, I must be about 10, I said to her afterwards, why did you talk to him? He's in the Tories. And she was like, well, just because he's in the Tories and we have different opinions, he's still my friend. And so I can't remember which Tory that was. But, you know, I kind of was like, oh, right. So you talk to people with different beliefs from you. And so, you know, that all of that stuff by kind of osmosis, I absorbed and I learned, and it wasn't kind of shoved down your throat. It was just the way she was. And there was this sense that anything was possible with Mo. And even when she got sick, she kind of maintained this force, this energy, and this driving force about wanting to change the world for the better. And as I say, when we were young, like, you know, when Mo was a backbencher, you tend to have Lou and Anna will remember, and Alf will remember this better, but and Naz, but you have a kind of early evening vote, and then you have a later evening vote. And we lived quite nearby, and I think the sort of later evening can be as late as 10 o'clock, and I think the early evening sort of 7, 8 o'clock. Anyway, Mo, as often as possible, would try and get home between those votes, and she'd come back home, and we'd all have dinner, or she'd take us for a quick swim. She loved swimming before going back to the vote. And that kind of carried on as we got older. You know, when we were in Northern Ireland, I was 13, 14 when Mo was made the Northern Ireland Secretary. She'd been shadow before that. But when we were kind of going over a lot, we'd go over every weekend, we'd go over in the holidays. And she was obviously insanely busy. She was crazy busy. Work never stopped. There wasn't a day off. Weekends didn't exist. But we just sort of all lump in together. And she'd take us to things, and she'd take us to meet people, and we'd go off into the community, or she'd take us to the army barracks for a swim. And it was all just and people would come for dinner, and there was this real, everyone was welcome. Again, going back to that, no one's better or worse. You know, you'd have all sorts of people sitting around the table or coming around in the afternoon, some of whom were considered very important in politics or the media or celebrity world, and others who wouldn't be considered by the world to be those people, but they were sitting alongside them. And if anything, Mo would probably rather have sat next to those people than the ones who were considered important. So there was this kind of sense that that was how things were. So I think for me, as Mo's stepdaughter, she has had an enormous impact on me. You know, as was mentioned earlier, I'm a filmmaker, I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I guess in all the work I've ever done, whilst I knew I didn't want to go into politics, I did know that whatever I did, I wanted to platform those unheard voices, platform people who don't get heard enough. And quite interestingly, that's weirdly led me to now make a film about Mo, because when the 20 years Good Friday Agreement celebrations happened a couple of years ago, I was asked to write a piece because I'd been sort of quietly in the background saying that I was feeling quite angry, that I felt that perhaps Mo wasn't getting the recognition that she should be getting. for the part she played in the Good Friday Agreement. Not least of all that, I mean, what she then went on to do internationally and in her constituency. But I wrote a piece about the Good Friday Agreement and her being erased from the history books. And I was nervous about doing that. You know, it's a difficult position from a personal position to say that kind of thing. But I was glad I did, and it was met with this sort of extraordinary response. And so I'm now at the moment making a film, developing a film about Mo, which I'm not going to go into too much detail. But the other thing that I will talk about a little bit, and going back to that idea of Mo being my relationship with Mo, is that I remember when Mo died, and it was the morning Mo had died, and my dad had called me. I was in London, I was 21, and he said to me, you know, I've called you to get this information to you before it's on the news. I want you to hear it from me. And because, you know, it was on the 8 a.m. news, I think. And so he woke, I was 21, I was not awake. And so he woke me up, and I knew, you know, I'd seen her a couple of days before. I knew this was coming. But anyway, I got on the train to go to their house in Kent to be with my dad. And I was sitting on the train, and I was sitting next to a man. I was, you know, the first version of the Evening Standard had come out, and I was sitting next to a man who was reading it. And in the, you know, the picture in front of me was a picture of Dad and Mo's wedding, and it sort of was like Mowlam dead, or whatever, you know, was whatever that headline was. And I had this sort of moment where I kind of realized that whilst Mo was mine, Mo was the world's, and that is such a weird feeling of, and I knew it because, you know, I could come down in the morning on a Saturday morning, she'd be on the telly, but she'd also be walking through the front door. It had always been like that, but in her death, there was this sort of moment that confronted me. Anyway, I'm not going to go on for too much longer, but I still do a bit of work in Northern Ireland today. I by accident have kind of ended up, I've actually made a film there before, and about men and post-conflict identity. And I do quite a lot of work now with women. I work with an amazing group quite a lot called the Women's Network in Belfast. And, you know, actually what I'm realizing in my anger about her sort of absence in the legacy is if you talk to people on the ground, if you talk to the grassroots communities, if you talk to the people Mo met, she's very remembered and loved and universally loved. And what's quite interesting is, you know, in a place that is still arguably divided at times, not all of it, but it can be, Mo sort of transcends that divide, and not for everyone, but as a general rule, she's pretty loved and still very remembered. And to still be that remembered when you died in 2005 and you weren't even the prime minister or the president, well, we don't have a president, you know, the prime minister is pretty good, really. I mean, it says something about what you've done. So as I say, I don't claim to know what Mo was like at work necessarily, and I was her stepdaughter, but I do know she was brave. I do know she was very passionate about things being fair, and she didn't accidentally do what she did in politics. You know, it wasn't a sort of, sometimes she's projected as someone who kind of, with her kind of bawdy nature and crass language, and she sort of fell into it. She was strategic. She wanted to get where she got to, and she wanted to change things for the better, and she cared about people. And watching her as I grew up, that is what I saw. And she wasn't a saint. She could be really difficult and tricky, but she knew why she was fighting, and she knew what she was fighting for. And I believe that Mo became a politician because she wanted to make the world better. And I think, you know, that isn't always the case. And the thing I do feel about Mo is that she did do that. And I think that's, you know, I think she can rest at ease, you know, if that is a thing she can do, knowing that she really did make the world a bit better. So thank you.
Thank you, Hen. That was lovely. And I think I said to you earlier, it's so lovely to meet someone who has had such a wonderful family relationship with their stepmom. But I think for me, who never met Mo, I was 17 in 1997, and she was just always this presence of inspiration. You know, I'd grown up, as I'm sure you did, watching Margaret Thatcher and thinking that's how a woman politician had to be, and then to see Mo, and she just transcended all that. She was so so inspiring, and so many people, when we've said we're doing this event, have said, oh, I met Mowlam once, or I was behind her in a queue once, lovely woman. And you know, that legacy is so absolutely true and absolutely there. We'll find a copy of your article and put it in the chat shortly. And Emily has just put in Mo's episode of Desert Island Discs, which is well worth a listen, and she talks then about the peace process while it's in place. So I'd really recommend that to anyone that's got time this evening. So now we're going to go over to Anna. Anna's going to talk about Mo's legacy and work in Redcar. So Anna, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And Hen, that was really lovely to listen to and really moving. And it's not for me to say, but I think she'd be so enormously proud of what you're doing and, you know, what you've achieved and how, you know, the values that you're carrying forward. It's just lovely, lovely to hear. And so thanks for what you're doing. I'm really looking forward to seeing your film. So yeah, I thought I'd talk a little bit about Mo in the constituency because honestly, she is still held in the most incredible regard in Redcar. Everybody loves her. Everybody has a story to tell. And I was really struck by what you said, Hen, about she was yours. And then you suddenly realize that she belonged to everybody. And I think the great thing about Mo was that she made everybody feel like she belonged to them. And so when I first came to Redcar in 2012 and I'd be out knocking on doors, people were really pleased to see a Labour person out and about, and they'd say, oh, you know, oh, I love Mo, and everyone had a story to tell. So whether that story was they were in the queue behind her, or she pinched one of their fags out of the packet in the pub, or she got them to somehow wangle them into buying her a whiskey, or some of the great stories about how she remembered everybody's name. Everyone recognized that she always remembered people's names, and even asked after their kids, their partner, husband, wife. She had a phenomenal memory for that. And I remember someone telling me about how they bumped into her in a shop just in Redcar High Street, and she said, "Oh, I'll be back in a second. I'll be back in a second." And they were with their children. Mo came back 10 minutes later with arms full of sweets and toys for the kids, and she'd just gone to go and kind of spoil them and treat them. And that was who she was. She was just like that with everybody. And you know, I think just everyone felt like they had a stake in her. Everyone felt that she listened to them and felt valued by her. And this whole thing, you know, that as you said, the values you've taken is that you're the same as everybody and nobody is better than you. And I think there was that real sort of, you know, wonderful warmth and accessibility that she had, so that everybody here in Redcar feels they have something of Mo, or they feel something of Mo, and she belonged to them, and they're incredibly proud of her and her legacy. And you know, they're indeed been enormous and probably impossible shoes to fill for those of us that have come after. But I wanted to, just in the time that I've got, I wanted to give you all a little tour of Mo's Redcar. Now, as Henry said, there isn't actually physically, there's not a huge amount of things that you can point to and say, oh, that. I remember reading Mo didn't want a statue. She didn't like statues because birds pooped on them and they got mucky. But there are a few things about Redcar that are very, you know, very much Mo. And I thought it'd be nice to share them with you. I don't know how many of you have ever been to Redcar, but if you haven't, here's a little tour of Mo Redcar. Oh, so if I can go back. So yeah, here we go. And actually I pinched that poster off for you, Hen. I thought it was great. Vote Marjorie Mowlam for Labour in Redcar. In fact, here many people still call her Marjorie Mowlam, which is lovely. And I thought this quote was great, and it fitted in with what you were saying just now about how you used to go out and go swimming. And it's from her Momentum book. He said, "Our house in Redcar is on the front and overlooks the sea. Out of the door, across the road, and you're on the beach. It's rather beautiful. Sitting up in bed and watching the sea is one of the best ways of relaxing. However difficult and tough times were in Westminster, that always put life into perspective. The sea is constant and strong and makes other things look pretty." And I think that was really beautiful. And I often used to find when I get back from Westminster on a sort of Thursday and be shattered, the sea just gave me life and some, you know, gave me my energy back. And I thought, you know, it was lovely how Mo had put that. And I thought you'd like to see her house here oops, sorry, I've gone forward too quickly. On the seafront, it's this one here, if you can see my cursor. This little extension was built for the protection that obviously she had in Northern Ireland. And as you can see, it's literally a quick walk across the road onto what is the beach behind here. Here's a lovely little boating lake, and there's a mosaic to mow here, which I'll show you in a bit. And of course, the iconic steelworks, which are so much part of Redcar's fabric for the last 100 years until they were closed in 2015. But there you go. That's, you can see the sea view that Mo would have had would have been something a bit like this. So here's the bandstand, here's the beach and the sea behind. And as I said, the boating lake and the steelworks there. So I thought it would just give you a little glimpse of her. And I had to show you that because I never, ever got bored of putting leaflets through Mo's door. It was always a source of great excitement to me to be able to go up those steps and know that that was her place. And as I said, just by the boating lake, there's a mosaic that was done by a number of school children. And it tries to capture a lot of her achievements. There's obviously a picture of Parliament here. There's images about Northern Ireland. There's horses here for the race course, the Dove of Peace, obviously for Northern Ireland, a handshake and so on. And it's fabulous. You can see it does sadly need a bit of maintenance and upkeep. It's got a little faded, so maybe that's a project for me to work on in the near future. But again, you can just see her house behind there. It's nice and close to where she lived. Another place where we've been able to do some memorials, recognition of Mo, is the Mowlam Memorial Park. This is where Redcar Town play football. And as you'll see here, it's a lovely stadium, lovely sort of football pitches. And again, the iconic steelworks in the background. That's the Mowlam Memorial Park. And this is fantastic. This has just opened this week, which is a really, really wonderful. It's a new academy for children with social, emotional and mental health challenges. And it's just opened in Redcar now. Fantastic facility, absolutely brilliant. You can see in the bottom corner is sensory room. They've got activity room. But I think Mo would have been absolutely delighted that that's been named in her honour. Obviously, they couldn't have a big opening ceremony because of COVID, but hopefully in the future that's something that we can go and celebrate. And this is something that I initiated in recognition of Mo. Again, I knew she wouldn't want a sort of physical thing, but 10 years after she passed, I thought it would be nice to set up the Inspiring Women Awards. And every year we have nominations for women in the local community who are doing amazing work, of things that are often unnoticed, unrecognised, or who've sort of battled through real difficulties in their lives and come through to make a real difference. So here we have the Inspiring Women, and the winner of the overall award is the Mowlam Award. So that's just a lovely event that takes place every year. And some more pictures there. Apologies for the quality, but always a great event, and women across the borough, because I just think it was so important to recognise Northern Ireland. I think saw the value of or the importance of women and the role they played in the community that wasn't always visible, that wasn't the loudest, but was often the most important and the most influential. And so just to finish off, here she is eating a portion of fish and chips from my favourite fish and chip shop in Russell's. And it just reminded me of the thing that everybody has to say about Mo, that she was just completely down to earth, and that you'd see her in the chippy and you'd chat to her. You knew perfectly well that 1 minute she was on the phone to Northern Ireland, brokering a major peace deal, talking to statesmen and women around the world, and changing the world, doing a hugely important international role. But the next minute she talked to them in exactly the same way as she talked to you in the chippy. She didn't change. Everybody was the same. As Hen said, no one was better than you. And so she'd be the same in the chippy as she was in Stormont or anywhere else. And so that's Mo. And it's just say she's so well loved, respected and recognised here in Redcar. People are enormously proud of her. If anything, they're a little indignant that perhaps she didn't get the recognition that they felt she deserved, or didn't perhaps play the role that we feel she might have played, perhaps as leader of the party or even the first Labour female Prime Minister. But her legacy here will never ever be forgotten. And as much as the infrastructure in those buildings and the few things that we have to name after her, it's the way people think and feel and talk about her that is, for me, her best legacy, and the people that she continues to inspire and to kind of bring hope to. And for a town like Redcar that's had a lot of struggles, it's had more than its fair share of difficulties and tragedies and battles. Mo is probably one of the proudest things when people think about their town and what they're proud of and what they identify with. Mo is an absolute beacon of that. So so people of Redcar are very proud, and it's lovely to be able to share some of that with you tonight.
Thanks, Anna, and rightly so. People are rightly so very proud of her. So now we're going to go over to Lou Haig, who is currently Shadow Secretary for State of Northern Ireland. So can talk a bit about the position that she holds that's similar to how Mo did. So Lou, over to you.
Thanks, Kelly, and such a pleasure to follow Hen and Anna. Anna, obviously, one of my really, really good friends, and devastated to see us lose that seat in Redcar in December 19, and we miss her terribly from the Commons. And obviously, really, really hope that she's back again soon, and that seat goes back Labour. And Hen, who I've got to know since taking on this brief, and we've been doing lots of work to try and correct the wrongs of Mo being written out and the legacy of Northern Ireland of the Labour Party. But it's just so lovely to hear these really personal stories, and a lot of my kind of experience and learning about Mo since I took on the role of Northern Ireland has reflected everything that Hen and Anna have said. My first visit to Northern Ireland as Shadow Secretary last July, I had exactly the same experience of meeting people in the pub, in the street, the groundkeeper in Stormont. All of them had a personal story to tell about Mo Mowlam, which is extraordinary. She was Secretary of State for 2 years. And in that time, she touched so many lives in Northern Ireland. She brought parties together in the Good Friday Agreement, and she did things like opening up Hillsborough and Stormont to the public because she believed passionately in inclusive politics and in bringing the public into politics, not taking politics out to the people. The thing that I think strikes me most about Mo, not having known her personally, was that she really loved people. And that's what drove her, which seems like a really odd thing to say about a politician, because surely all politicians like people and that's why they do it. But I think sometimes it is what's missing from our politics, is that love of ordinary people, and politicians that genuinely enjoy being out amongst people, having proper conversations, being challenged and leading from the front. And Mo exuded that in absolutely everything that she did. And I think it's what drove her through her most difficult times. As I said, I never knew Mo personally. She died not long after I joined the party as a teenager in 2005. But reading about her and speaking to the countless people that knew her, I think it's notable that when she was appointed to Northern Ireland, she received lots of the criticisms that will be familiar to a lot of women on the call tonight, that she lacked gravitas and that she didn't have the same grasp of the issues as her predecessors. But anyone who was around those negotiations knew that Mo leaned into those criticisms around a lack of gravitas and decorum, and she used it very, very much to her advantage. And she absolutely undermined and made very uncomfortable some of those stuffy politicians that were around the table at the time, and used that to help achieve her negotiating means. And I think because Mo really understood people, she knew that the people of Northern Ireland by 1998 were absolutely ready for peace. But most commentators at that time would have not believed that a peace was possible. But politics, as the late Seamus Mallon, the former deputy leader of the SDLP, has said, is the art of making the impossible possible. And Mo absolutely did that. She brought her own distinctive personality to the problems. Someone who, when she was appointed to that brief, I think really threw people. She wasn't the kind of personality that anybody expected would have been placed in Northern Ireland. But it was exactly those characteristics that made her seem unusual, that made her so successful and effective: her courage, her inclusivity, and, as Hen said, her relentless striving to make the world a better place, her refusal to accept things just because they were, and her ability to bring people together. And over 11 short months from Labour taking office in 1997 to the agreement passing the referendum, through sheer force of will and stamina, she showed that a fairer shared future for Northern Ireland was within reach. And I think Mo also recognised that the real division in Northern Ireland in those months leading up to the Good Friday Agreement wasn't between communities. It wasn't between the Brits and the Irish, between Protestants and Catholics, between Unionists and nationalists. It was between those who wanted peace and the few who didn't. And she expanded the former and shrunk the latter. And she said at the time, in relation to the politicians who sacrificed so much to come to the negotiating table, it takes courage to push things forward. It takes courage to build that vision and go for it. And she demonstrated that repeatedly in her time as Secretary of State, but particularly in her enormous bravery in visiting the Maze prison after the murder of loyalist Billy Wright. Loads of people advised her against doing that, but she recognised it was people, not politicians, who would ultimately bring the peace. And it was absolutely inspired statesmanship in going out and reaching to the loyalist communities, and loyalists absolutely loved her. And I think it's really important, and I really, commend the Fabian Women's Network for honouring Mo in particular, but it's really important that we're having this discussion at the moment in relation to Northern Ireland, because that inspired statesmanship and leadership is so lacking from this government in relation to Northern Ireland at the moment. The UK government, as co-signatories to the Good Friday Agreement, alongside the people of Northern Ireland, its politicians, and of course the Republic of Ireland, are custodians to that precious Good Friday Agreement. And we should recognise that it wasn't just a piece of paper that was written at the time and can be put on the shelf and say, job done, that was peace in Northern Ireland, the rest of us can move on. It's a living, breathing peace process that requires careful management and careful custody, and this government has been repeatedly irresponsible and reckless in relation to it over the last 11 years, and is again putting the stability of Northern Ireland and therefore its people and its peace process at risk. We've been in the Commons today. I was successful in securing an urgent question to the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, who, by the way, in a recent polling was found to be the least popular Secretary of State in the history of Northern Ireland, which is some going when you think about some of his competitors for that title. But his unilateral actions, again, in relation to the Northern Ireland Protocol, a treaty which was designed to avoid a border on the island of Ireland and protect the Good Friday Agreement, have again undermined our government's relationships abroad with the EU and with the Republic of Ireland. And the Irish Foreign Minister Simon Coveney came out last week and said that Brits are no longer a partner that can be trusted in relation to Northern Ireland, which is absolutely devastating, because it was the British and Irish government relationship that was absolutely fundamental to the writing, securing of the Good Friday Agreement and its success, and how it has been sustained. And by trashing that relationship with the Irish, the government are completely undermining the stability and sustainability of the Good Friday Agreement. So I think now is a really important time to reflect on Mo's legacy, what Mo achieved when we were in government, and I think what Mo would be doing and telling us to do now. So I think, firstly, she would be telling us absolutely to uphold the principles of the Good Friday Agreement as sacrosanct, to protect the delicate and fragile compromise that it achieved, recognising that it was a compromise. And in order to achieve agreement, everyone has to give a little. She'd be honest about the difficult and sometimes impossible dilemmas that Brexit has presented to Northern Ireland. And she'd be bringing everyone to the table to get a solution, in sharp contrast to the divisive and juvenile politics that the Tories represent. I think she would have cracked on with those elements of the Good Friday Agreement, which 23 years on from it being signed still haven't been implemented. And I think particularly she would have been focusing on women's rights, which are in a shocking state in Northern Ireland. We talk about it a lot in relation to abortion rights, which are still well behind the rest of the UK, but domestic violence is at appalling levels. In 2017, Northern Ireland had the highest femicide rate of any country in Europe. And Northern Ireland remains the only part of the UK that doesn't have a violence against women and girls strategy. So as the first woman to hold this brief for the Labour Party since Mo, I think it's really important that we shine a spotlight on that, because despite having a woman First Minister and Deputy First Minister, women's rights and violence against women is still not treated as a priority at all in Northern Ireland. And I think finally she would have really focused on young people. From everything I've know and read about Mo, that was what really motivated her. She cared passionately about young people and building the shared fairer future for them in Northern Ireland, and particularly in relation to further education, which she taught in before she was elected. But I know in speaking to young people across communities in Northern Ireland, their frustration that, again, those elements of the Good Friday Agreement, for example, a shared integrated education and integrated housing, simply haven't been acted on. But I also know that even those who have been born and grown up since the agreement, the ceasefire generation, who would have no memory of Mo being in government at all, that she's still very much their hero. And her star still shines so brightly in Northern Ireland. And I know that her legacy will be felt for many more generations to come.
Thanks, Louise. And can we just thank you for the work you've done recently to educate people on the Good Friday Agreement? I think there was an absolute deficit of knowledge, and I'm really glad to see the work you've introduced to try and fix that deficit. I think it's so important. Okay, now we're going to go over to Alf, Lord Alf Dubb. He used to work in Mo's team in Northern Ireland, so I'm excited to hear what he had to say. I'm very excited to have him with us. And we've even allowed a man on the panel. We're so pleased to have him with us. So Alf, over to you.
Well, first of all, thanks very much for inviting me and for being the only man on the panel. I feel very comfortable about that, but thank you. Can I say, I feel this is very emotional, for me, it's a very emotional evening. And when Henrietta was talking about it, you know, there were tears in my eyes. It brought back so many memories. And I'm not going to go through the politics of it. I'm just going to talk about some of the memories of Mo and the impact she had and what it was like. And I think that's probably the contribution I can make to this discussion. But, you know, she got to Northern Ireland, and I think she took Northern Ireland by storm. They hadn't seen anything like this in any previous Secretary of State. The previous Tories, good or bad, were patrician Tories, if you know what I mean. They were people with a certain background. And Mo came along, she was a street politician, she was touchy, she was feely, she was cuddly, she went up to people, put her arms around them, and people in Northern Ireland were just totally taken aback by this, and they were delighted. So different, a different sense of what Britain was about, what a new Labour government was about. It just took them by storm, and I can't tell you the feeling one had when one was with her, and the way people, they adored her, you know, and it's wonderful. But yet she was tough, absolutely tough as anything. And you know, I remember on duty weekends, once a month, I'd be at Hillsborough Castle, next door to the main castle. But and Mo would occasionally be there, and she'd come in. She'd learn how to tonic or something. Sat down on the sofa, she'd chat. It was all very relaxed, and yet behind it all was the most tense political situation, where she was handling such delicate things. You know, now I think what's the man I can say this. I think some men found it very difficult coping with Mo. She was a strong woman, she was a tough woman, and I think some of them weren't too comfortable about that. Now, she won many of them over, but it was quite an education for men in Northern Ireland, very male-dominated as a politics. It's quite an education for them, actually, to come across a woman who could level with them, who could equal them, who could better them, tough, and yet she was a woman, feminine, all these other things. And I think that made such a difference. And you know, when I think back upon it, I have so many memories. So many came welling back as we talked. But I've sometimes asked people in Northern Ireland, and I said, do you think Mo made a difference? Do you think her personality, her impact, what she did, brought the peace process forward? And the nationalists will say, yes, she put her stamp on it and she made a difference. The unionists tend to say, oh, it would have happened anyway, it was inevitable, she just happened to be there. But it's absolutely clear the nationalists have got that right, that she made that impact and she changed things. And I'm not sure there are any men that were on the Labour Party at the time who could have done that, because it was a combination of her abilities, her skill, her personality, her tremendous drive, her bravery, all these other qualities are all there. We could see them day by day. We had ministerial meetings, you know, once a week. We talked about all these things, and she was really absolutely driving force. So just a few memories that come out. Those of you, you're also young. Lovely people, so many young people. The Labour Party conference, and you know, and Tony Blair made a speech, and he praised Mowlam, and everybody stood up and gave her a standing ovation, gave Mo a standing ovation. And Tony was a bit taken aback, and he was forced to say he's never known anybody get a standing ovation in the middle of somebody else's speech. But that was a sign of what the party thought about Mo, how much they respected her, how much they valued her, how much they understood the enormous contribution that she'd made. And that moment in party conference will stay with me forever, as will so many other moments, because of the great thing. Now, somebody mentioned abortion rights. I discussed it with Mo, you know, and she said, look, I'd love to do it. I'd love to do it. But she said, I just don't have the political space. You know, there's so many pressures. She just can't do it at the moment. And I believe she would have done it if she could have done. But one has to say to people who are impatient and say, oh, this should have happened under Mo. No, there wasn't the political space for her. She had to keep the peace process going. She had to keep people on sides. She couldn't afford to have all these extra arguments. I'm sure she regretted bitterly that she wasn't able to do it. But I would say in her defense, I don't believe it was possible or would have been sensible at the time. It's just one of those things that was there as a sort of a thing she'd have liked to aspire to, but it wasn't possible. It was for another day. I loved going into her office, and her office was almost the centre of the world. You know, Northern Ireland was never such a great place in the past, but Mo's office was the centre. The phone would go, Madeleine Albright, you know, Secretary of State in Washington, somebody from the EU. The whole world was making a beeline. And of course, most of the leading American politicians were there. They came to Belfast, and Mo was there, and Mo was the centre of this, and Mo was doing this. I remember once Tony Blair discovered very few of the cabinet had ever been to Northern Ireland, so he said, you know, the cabinet should go over there. Anyway, somebody, I won't mention his name, some senior member of the Labour cabinet said he was coming over just at the time when everything was going brilliantly. Mo had success after success, you know. Mo was a bit taken aback because she hadn't got time for all these people. And she said to me, well, I couldn't get through to him, but I left a message. I said, sorry, there's no more room on the bandwagon. So I like that as a comment, you know. And that went to a very senior member of the cabinet. So I just thought that was quite a nice moment. And of course, she gave us all a lot of leeway. You know, there was some document about water privatization or something, and I was dead against. You know, I wanted water to stay in the public sector. And I said to Mo, look, there's pressure from number 10. We should keep this thing a bit open and so on. I'm totally against it, Mo. I can't. Well, she said, we're putting out a government policy document. She said, what you can do is write an introduction and say what you personally think. Now, normally you don't do that in government. You don't have a personal opinion. So I put down I was totally against water privatization. You know, I thought it was a bad idea, even though there were noises to number 10. I mean, it didn't happen. It would have been absolute disaster. But the tragedy is this, that towards the end, the unionists fell out with her. Now, the DUP were always not on her side, but David Trimble, who was then, of course, the leader of the largest party, David Trimble fell out with her. I remember once I came back from Derry, and there was some reception in Belfast. Now, David Trimble was there, and our line was to be friendly to everybody. You know, we were supposed to be friendly. I've shaken hands with everybody, all these people, and you know, initially it was quite unusual, but it was okay after a while, because we said to ourselves, whatever their background, you know, we've got to bring them on board because it's part of the peace process. Anyway, David Trimble muttered a bit and said, oh, he moaned about Mo, and I said, you shouldn't be saying this to me. She's my boss. And then he said, he said, oh, no, I talked to the real boss. I said, no, David, Mowlam is my boss. I'm not having you denigrate her. I'm sorry, I just don't accept that. But of course, he campaigned against her, and in the end, she was moved. And it was the most bitter disappointment. There was one effort to move her, and she resisted that. And then she was moved. And I think it was a real tragic error. It was a tragic error. I suppose the number 10 line was, well, she'd fallen out with the unionists, so she couldn't be that effective. I'm not sure that was the right call. I think the right call was she got the peace process brilliantly along down the path here. It was really well, doing really well. And I know it damaged her. I mean, Hen, you'll know this. It was sad for me that somebody who was, but this is the whole truth. This is what happened. She was absolutely at the peak form. She was on top of everything, absolutely brave. As you said, Louise, she went into the maze. Number 10 told her not to go in the maze. It was a brave thing. It could have gone badly wrong, but she did it to save the peace process, and we discussed it. And she had to grit her teeth and do it because it was hard. She did it. She did the brave things. She went backwards and forwards. She didn't stint herself at all. Backwards and forwards, if it was necessary, she went backwards and forwards, because that was what was necessary, and that's what she did. But it was a real tragedy, I think, that she was moved at the time she was. I don't accept it was necessary. I don't think it was right to undermine her, and it sent a very bad signal. Fortunately, the peace process was so well underway that it couldn't change things, and she did a terrific job. Can I thank you again for this evening, and thank you, Hen, for the other things you're doing as a tribute to Mo. I fear is that unless we keep her memory alive of the things she did, of what a fantastic person she was, what she did for Northern Ireland, what she did for the peace, what she did for the Labour Party, what she did for women, all these things, but I'm just sad that her memory has faded and she isn't getting the recognition that she ought to have, and it's our job to make sure she has it, because our history will be damaged unless we place Mo exactly in the important and influential position that she should have evermore in the history of the Labour Party of this country.
Al, thank you so much. That was so moving, and I think your point about we need to keep Mo's legacy alive is absolutely right. I just want to comment that we've had a few messages from people saying how much they're enjoying this evening and how emotional they're finding it. So I just wanted to pass that on. So finally, now we're going to go over to Naz, who is MP for Bradford West, and she's going to talk a bit about Mo's legacy among women in Westminster and beyond.
Hi, thank you very much. And can I just echo how emotional, I didn't even know Mo, and I'm very new to Parliament, as in the same time as Louise and when Anna came in 2015, but listening to the conversation this evening has really, really enlightened me. And I've learned so much during this conversation. And I get why it's so emotional, because every person I've spoken to in and around Westminster and people who have worked in Northern Ireland, some of the language that is used is absolutely consistent. You know, she was a people's person. Mowlam in a character in so many references to her legacy around Westminster and beyond. And Harriet Harman, who's now the mother of the house, and she said on the first day back after the 1987 election, she was feeling really low. Her daughter was only 5 months old at the time, and they were going in to swear in. And in the lobby, she'd met Mo, and she was very different. She said she was very tall, blonde, beautiful, in a blue flowy dress. And they were going to sign in. She was very different. And she actually made the POP and Parliament a much easier place to be in because of her her presence there. And she took her 5-month-old baby whilst they were swearing in, who was absolutely really, really took to Mo straight away. So that solidarity historically that we've had from Mo to other women in Parliament, and that culture is that culture starts somewhere. And for me, I see that culture today, but I can see that it's built on the shoulders of the Mo Mowlams of this world. And I'm very grateful to be in that position, to be benefiting from that legacy. But it wasn't always easy. It wasn't always plain sailing. And Harriet recalls, you know, there was a time when she was coming out of her final cabinet meeting before she got sacked. And she actually said to Mo, you know, at least you're still here. And Mo turned around and said, well, it's okay. There are many knives in my back too. So, you know, the conversation that Alf was just alluded to in terms of the men struggling, I can see why, you know, why men would find that it would really, really threaten people. That here you have a strong, articulate woman taking her space, owning her narrative, and at times making people feel uncomfortable, which she was really good at, and taking that space. So I think you know, there's lots to be thought of and remembered there. There was an anecdote that Anna shared with me earlier, and I'm going to share it, but I don't know which MP it came with. There was an anecdote of, well, there used to be a shooting range apparently in Westminster, and she went down and she went with a measuring tape and started measuring it, and the Tories were asking why she was measuring the shooting range, and she said, we're measuring it to measure for a creche here. I'm not sure how true that is, but I could imagine how the Tories or any men would have really, really struggled with that. But one of the nice things that she left, not just in the women of Westminster and the politicians, was Mo had to write her Christmas cards from earlier September, because she knew the name of every staff member, the caterers, the cleaners, the security staff. Now, I'm just thinking about having to start writing Christmas cards from September, you know, it just says, it encompasses for me exactly what kind of a people's person she was. And somebody said, when I was asking them, said, no disrespect to politicians, and please don't take it the wrong way, but she was so genuinely decent. I'm not sure what that means for the rest of us politicians, but she was so genuinely decent and authentic. And Peter Hain said a couple of things that he wanted to share was, she was intuitively brilliant and related to women in Northern Ireland as no other politician, local or UK, had ever had. And one of the funny things that he remembers is one was taking off her wig whilst negotiating with Ian Paisley, which startled him, but not as much as when she effing blinded in front of rather than at him. And, you know, she once was stealing Tony Blair's chips off his plate whilst they were both snatching a meal during the GFA negotiations, you know, the Good Friday Agreement negotiations. And I think what I've heard today from Henrietta, and I didn't have the privilege of knowing Mo, but I stand on the shoulders of Mo and what she's left, you know, that risk that she took. She pushed the boundaries of what was acceptable as politicians. And when you have senior people saying to you, she was so genuinely decent and she was such a people's person, around Westminster, beyond Westminster, across the world, and the campaigns that she was fighting for. But when Henrietta said she wanted to leave the world a better place, I can absolutely say she certainly made her mark, and may there be many more events like this. And I wish you well, Henrietta, in your documentary, because I'd certainly want to see that. And I just want to say thank you to Lou and Anna this evening as well, because Lou's got a big pair of shoes to step into, but I really, really admired, you know, when she put out her piece to make sure that we remembered Mo's legacy and she wasn't written out of the history. And for another woman who's stepping into her shoes now, albeit in opposition and hopefully in government, and hopefully with Anna back with us in the next election, you know, there's a huge legacy there to build upon. So good luck to everybody. And Alf, it was lovely to see you, albeit virtually on the call. Can't wait for COVID to be over and meet in person. Thank you very much for inviting me tonight.
It was a pleasure, Naz. It really was a pleasure to have you here with us at last. So I think we should probably finish with just a quick summing up of ways that people can remember Mo's legacy. Mo's book, which I have here, which is a book she wrote herself, is available online, and I would really recommend people read that and learn a bit more about Mo's thoughts and feelings when she was Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, and the sort of experiences she had when she left the job and the reasons why. When Henrietta's film comes out, we'll definitely be putting links up to watch that, so that's something to look out for. I'm really excited about that now. I can't wait. Do listen to Mo on Desert Island Discs. As I said earlier, it really was fantastic. And do, as Alf said, you know, do tell your children about Mo. Do the Labour Party training on the Good Friday Agreement. Let's make sure this isn't a part of our history that is forgotten. As a Labour Party member and a Labour Party councillor, I'm extremely proud of the work that we did in Northern Ireland, and I'm extremely proud that a woman was the one who finally did that. I can remember being told that being Secretary of State from Northern Ireland was a poison chalice, and people only did that job to get their name known. There was never any hope and things like that when I was growing up, and to see Mo step in and change all that was absolutely, you know, amazing, and absolutely should not be forgotten. It's so, so important. All that remains then is for me to thank our absolutely fantastic panel. It's been an emotional night. It's been a great night, and I'm really, really pleased and honoured that we had this opportunity to celebrate Mo here with so many people. So take care, everyone, and we'll see you at our next event. But if you've got any comments, please do tweet them to us. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Good night.